What's up and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Over the past couple years, I've made a lot of videos with a lot of different self-contained music production devices and Grooveboxes, and in that process have developed quite a few opinions about them. And I've also seen quite a few of your opinions, because a lot of you are also hardcore users of such devices. So a while back, I put up a community tab post asking, in your opinion, what are the most important features that Grooveboxes can have? Think of this video as kind of a Dear Groovebox manufacturers video of telling them what my slice of the community wants to see. And I'll have my own commentary thrown in as well. And hopefully I can offer some recommendations based on the features that you guys are talking about to help you find the Groovebox of your dreams, or at least get a little closer to it. So let's jump into it, starting off with ease of use or fluidity of workflow. And of course, this is going to be super relative depending on your musical background, your experience with music production hardware, how patient you are, and the kind of experience you have in mind. And even different people have different tolerances for different level of, say, button presses or button press combinations or the presence or absence of a screen. For me, something like the MPC-1, which some people will say is just a glorified iPad, that counts in my mind because all of the hardware is super well integrated to the software. It's built for each other at a level that makes it inseparable. But for some people, the MPC-1 is not going to be hands-on enough. Some people want to go fully screenless, for instance. And that's a sentiment that's kind of unique to my community and not something I see everywhere else. A lot of people say, oh, I wish this device had a bigger screen. But in my community, everyone's saying, oh, I wish this device didn't have a screen. That's an overgeneralization, of course. Not everyone thinks that, but it's a more popular opinion around these parts. And I totally get it, because in my mind, something like an Ovation circuit is kind of the gold standard for an incredibly fluid workflow. Screenless, yes, but that's because the pads are the screen, and that ends up being very hands-on to use. Plus, it does make good use of shift commands that are very clearly labeled, and it has knobs that behave differently depending on different windows, and it makes very good use of those as well. If you're going to have a screen, I do think that it should be something like the Electron Digitact, where it's a high contrasty screen, so if you're sight impaired, hopefully that's at least a little more manageable, and it feels like an extension of the device itself. Everything on the screen has a very clear connection to the physical knobs. And did I mention how important physical knobs are to make something feel hands-on? Good pads and good knobs go a long way towards making a device feel tactile to work with. And because we're getting into something that's hardware-based and self-contained, that's what we want. We're trying to get away from the staring at a computer screen, I've got my computer screen down here, experience. So the further you can get away from that, the better. And if you are going to have a screen, try to make it something that is an extension of the rest of the device's interface. For me personally, I think the MPC-1 does a pretty good job of that. Not everyone will agree, but there it is. Also, I don't see this talked about much, but in my mind, having your keys and or pads be separate from your step sequencer is absolutely essential for a smooth user experience. I want to be able to hold down a step and then press a note immediately, or the other way around. I don't want to have to go back and forth between different folders. I don't want to have to scroll between a note like on the MC101 or Digitact. Like, it can be fine, but being able to sequence stuff with both my sequencer and my keys and pads in view makes everything so much faster. Something like an Ovation circuit or MC707 or VerseLab MV1 are good examples of devices that give you that. That's really important to me. Also, really important for me personally are finger drummable pads. Ideally, they should be fairly big enough to do double finger taps on them, and be sensitive enough to register minute hits, but not so sensitive that they double trigger. I want to be able to do stuff like this. That might seem like a bit of an instance of weird flex, but okay. And to be fair, it is, but it is a pretty good stress test, and it shows just how good the MPC pads are. Although, lately I've been having a bit more double triggering than I did previously. It's a little concerning. But regardless, that's kind of my gold standard, is a large enough rubber pad that can take pretty much anything I throw at it. Even though for sequencing, I'm not really going to play that stuff in live. I'm going to sequence in note rolls and that kind of thing. But I want to be able to play it. It goes a long way towards making something feel hands-on. And something like the Electribe that has appropriately sized pads, but they're not nearly as sensitive. Or even the Roland MC707, something about it just doesn't feel as good. It's close, but something about the material doesn't have enough give to it, or something like that. It's hard to describe, and once again, totally subjective, but in my opinion, something like a circuit or a launch pad is also a good option. Basically, what I'm saying is, the trend of the deluge or poly and tracker size pads makes me sad, and I would like to see people stop doing it. All that to say, a Groovebox is more than just a piece of consumer tech, it's a musical instrument, and making it feel as hands-on as possible goes a long way towards making it feel like a proper musical instrument. Up next, let's talk about portability. And this one, in terms of its importance, will really vary from person to person. And usually the more portable a device is, the more you sacrifice functionality, or at least drive up the cost to keep the same functionality. Look at the cost of the MPC 1 versus an MPC Live, for instance. And this has even fluctuated over time for me personally. At first, when I got into Grooveboxes, I got a Novation Circuit, and I would take it on lunch breaks to cafes and make beats, and that was great. That was my main music production outlet when I was feeling super busy and overwhelmed, and just took whatever time I could get to make music. Once the pandemic hit and we were all in lockdown, and we were working from home, that equation changed, and I didn't care so much about portability anymore. But these days, I've been starting to notice that when I get home from work and I just want to make some music, I don't want to sit at a table, maybe alone in my room, and work on stuff. I want to just sit on the couch in the living room, be a little beat gremlin, just kind of curled up. And that means that I'm starting to think about replacing my MPC 1 with an MPC Live. We'll see if I actually go through with it or not. Subscribe to find out, I guess. Regardless, portability is a really nice feature of Grooveboxes, and it does matter in terms of the difference between a Groovebox and a MIDI controller. Because with a MIDI controller, you're hooking it up to a computer. So the portability is just going to be limited because you've got two separate things hooked up to each other. But something self-contained can be a lot more portable. You can throw it in a backpack by itself. You can have it on your lap while sitting on the couch by itself. You can have a more distraction-free setup with portability, and for a lot of people, that's going to be very important. I've seen a variety of opinions on what is the gold standard for making it portable in terms of how you power it. Personally, I think that the go-to should still be AA batteries. If you want it to be more sustainable, just get some good rechargeables and use those. It'll be a bit more inconvenient, but it's better than a difficult-to-replace lithium-ion battery dying and then just leaving you high and dry. Lithium-ion batteries can be a good go-to, though. I just would really want to see it ensured that those are easily replaceable to extend the life of a device and not just have it become e-waste the second that the battery craps out. Of course, there's wall power. That is obviously less portable, but is a good backup in case an internal battery fries itself. And there's the option of USB power, which I've been seeing more often these days, and actually kind of like. Something like the Roland VersaLab MV1. It's a pretty light device, so you'd want to see it be portable, and you don't just have to plug it into a wall. You can power it via a USB power bank pretty easily. And something like the Digitact, I think it's a bit harder, and you've got to really make sure you have a power bank that's powerful enough. You can't just do it off a random phone power bank, as far as I understand, but that's something I haven't had a chance to tinker with a bunch because I still can't get my hands on a damn cable. Regardless, that's a decent option. So let's move on. Up next, let's talk about sampling, and there are a few aspects of this. First of all, sampling directly in is always a very welcome feature, like a proper audio input to sample into. So you can sample your synths, or just sample from your phone on the fly if you've got the Splice Sounds app on there or something like that. Having direct sampling in abilities is a really nice feature, and I would love to see more upcoming Grooveboxes incorporate it. For instance, it was nice to see when Roland released the VersaLab MV1 that it had proper-sized audio inputs. And of course, the Circuit Rhythm, also with its proper-sized audio inputs, is good, but that does bring us into a limitation that I see foisted upon us quite a bit, and that is monophonic sampler tracks with short sampler time. Now, I'm a civil engineer, not a computer engineer, and I'm sure that there are some technical limitations that make this a viable option for a lot of gear manufacturers. And I've defended them in the past, and I stand behind those defenses. Like, you can get a lot more than a lot of people realize out of 8-track monophonic samplers. Digitact, Circuit Rhythm, Polyan Tracker, and whatever else is out there. You can get full sounding tracks out of those, and it's not even that hard, I promise. However, I and many others would love to see stereo polyphonic sampling become the industry standard. I think at this point it's time. The Roland MC101 can do it. Check a video I did recently dedicated to what makes it unique in 2022. And stuff like the standalone MPCs can do it. It's time to see the industry start following suit on that. And once you've actually got your samples into your device, a lot of us really want to see some pretty comprehensive ways of working with them and shaping them to fit the track you're working on. For instance, I love the filter envelopes on the Digitact or MPC-1, and I really wish that the Digitact had glide or vibrato in the way that the Roland MC101 gives you. And I really like the distortion on the Circuit Rhythm, or once again, the Digitact. It's kind of a clean distortion that dirties up sounds really nicely. And sample chopping. Lazy chop is a fantastic feature, and I'd love to see something like the Digitact incorporate that, and something like the Circuit Rhythm or the MPC-1 does that incredibly well. Sample chopping should not require menu diving. It should be something you can do in a tactile way, in my opinion. And all of this leads us nicely into sound engines. I've already talked a bit about polyphony and ample ways to shape your sound. Overall, I think a lot of people would like to see more devices come out that let you do more sound design completely from scratch, kind of in the vein of the Korg Electribe 2, the synth version, and to a degree even the sampler version. It's got some pretty comprehensive ways of working with sounds. The Digitact has its 2 LFOs as of the latest software update when I'm filming this. There are a lot of ways to turn samples into synths, and we would like to see more just raw synthesis. A more complete synth engine built into more budget devices. Because for something like the Circuit Trax, it's got a good sound engine, but a lot of people think it sounds pretty dated and want to see it updated. And I think there's an opportunity here for gear manufacturers to swoop in and push the envelope there. Literally. Up next, let's talk about sequencing. I've already talked about the importance of having a visible separate step sequencer from your keys or pads, but let's talk about some other stuff that a lot of people have told me they really want to see. The big thing is step-by-step parameters, things like being able to step automate elements, probability, and conditional triggers. A lot of Electron style stuff is basically in very high demand over other devices. People really want to see everyone else bite Electron's stuff. And for good reason. Electron's sequencers are very deep and fairly intuitive, at least to learn the basics. So as much power as you can get on a step-by-step basis, that looks like something that people want to see. I also think that having a dedicated chord mode like the MC101 or 707 is a very welcome feature, where you can just trigger one-finger chords and then even edit those chords for each pad. Very nice to have. Arpeggiators are nice. I don't tend to use them all that much, but some people place a very high importance on them. And of course, multiple scales that you can switch between, especially on a pad-based device. Always great to have. And here is another me opinion. I always like seeing patterns rather than sequences. So something like the Roland Versab MV1 or Akai MPC1, they work in sequences. So you have one song section that you're working on, and if you want to create variations on that over the course of a song, you have to copy that sequence to be a second completely separate sequence and then make those changes. Some people see that as a way to force you to think in terms of full songs, but for me, it adds friction to making variations in a song, so it actually works the opposite way. I much prefer Launchpad style patterns, or Ableton style patterns, where each track has its own list of patterns, and then you can bundle those patterns together into scenes, and that's how you get your major changes across your song. It's a lot more flexible to work with, so stuff like the Innovation Circuits, Roland MC101, those work in that way, and in my opinion, it's a lot better and a lot more flexible. Or the Akai Force is another example, but I haven't used it yet. I'll get there. Also, I see a lot of people saying they want every device they use to have a proper song mode. And so that would probably come in the form of a really, really robust scene chain in this scenario that I'm talking about, but any song mode will do for a lot of people. For me personally, I rely on that a bit less. I like doing live jamming and launching patterns and scenes live, but I definitely understand the desire for a proper song mode and the ability to easily do automation across it, all that kind of stuff. With that comes also individual track export, which is another thing that I very strongly believe should be industry standard. Whether you're recording those into your computer via Overbridge on an Electron device, or not using anything proprietary and just some drivers with a Roland device, or directly exporting sound files like on the Polyan Tracker, Korg Electribe 2s, or MPCs, I just want to see that feature be baked into everything. Not everyone is going to make use of it, but those of us who like using standalone devices as our main production stations and also like getting that last bit of fine control that a DAW gives you, for instance, really dialing in rolling off low end or using effects that just couldn't be run by one of these standalone devices or doing some proper mastering, that's all stuff that I want to be able to do. I want to be able to make 80 to 90% of my track on my standalone device and then export that stuff to put in that last bit of polish. That is a personal thing. Not everyone in my audience agrees with me on that. So let's be very clear of who's saying that. That's me saying that. The song mode thing is a lot more popular in my comments than the individual track export is. But this is my platform and I get to say what I want. So that's something I want to see more manufacturers get on. And finally, let's talk about some features that aren't necessarily essential, but can be really nice to have. First of all, sidechain compression. Come on. It is the year of our Lord 2022. Devices should have sidechain compression built in. It's such a foundational aspect of electronic music and hip hop, and it should be a standard effect. Something that responds to like live input MIDI data as well, not just something that is a standard like LFO style pumper. Something that is actually a little more dynamic is always fantastic. So the MPC has a pretty good one. Circuits have good ones. That's about it, I think. There's kind of a janky version of it on the Polyan Tracker, and I'd like to see something like that get improved upon a bit. Speaking of the Polyan Tracker, though, wavetable support is always really cool. Wavetable and granulization. That's another way to deal with samples, and it's not necessarily essential, but having robust support for wavetables and granular stuff goes a long way towards making your thing pretty future-proof because you can always get new and unique sounds out of its sound engine. And another feature that I actually haven't seen in any of the Grooveboxes that I've tried, but something that a viewer mentioned they'd love to see, and I totally agree, the ability to queue up or test sounds. So play a sound and only hear it in your headphones and not hear it in like the stereo output. That way, if you're doing a live set, you could maybe make sure that you're about to launch the right clip before you actually commit to launching it. Or make sure that you like the sound that you're about to start playing in live for a little improvised bit before you do it. It would take some of the risk out of using a Groovebox as a live performance device. That would be really cool to see. Same with having a click that only goes to your headphones and not to the output, or having some way of separating the click out to maybe give it to a band member. That's not something that I personally would use, but it's something I've seen mentioned. Also, another thing I see mentioned that I haven't really had a chance to test on a ton of devices is being able to record in with an external MIDI controller, which a lot of devices can do, but then pass that MIDI through the device and trigger an external device. For whatever reason, not all devices can make that full connection, and that's something manufacturers, people want this. People get quite heated about it. They want it. Also, auto sampler. That's something that I really like. I'm pretty sure the Black Box has it, and I know that I love it on my standalone MPC. Auto sampler can really go a long way towards a device kind of absorbing another synth into itself, essentially. And it can kind of preserve some cool sound design and even make it a little more shareable, because then I can export, say, a key group program and someone else can use it. That's great. And that, I think, democratizes hardware stuff a little bit more, which has always been one of the best things about the modern music production landscape. And speaking of absorbing other devices into itself, mixer functionalities like the Novation Circuit tracks are really cool, in my opinion. Like, being able to pass synth audio through the device and then affect that audio with sidechain and send effects and that kind of stuff is great, and I'd love to see people push that even further. Like, be able to more easily add insert effects and stuff like that, and just overall have more devices do it. Those are, according to me and my community the most desirable Groovebox features. Let me know if you've got some extras that you want people to know about in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, whether you're a Groovebox user, someone who's just curious about this space, or a manufacturer. Hopefully you keep this stuff in mind. I'll be back with a new video in a little bit, so in the meantime, thank you so much for watching.